Hi, I'm Bob Morwell, pastor of Union United Methodist Church in Quincy, Illinois, and this is episode 16 of CyberBible 2.0, our online study of the Gospel according to Luke. Today we pick up with chapter 6, verse 7, in which Jesus begins what is known as the Sermon on the Plain. Now, I know some of you are thinking, don't you mean the Sermon on the Mount? Well, that appears in the Gospel according to Matthew, and while the two sermons are similar in many ways, they are not identical. Does this mean that one version is right and the other is wrong, and that the scriptures are being contradictory on this point? No, of course not. While they are different, they are not antithetical. That is, they do not disagree with one another. Instead, they cover different facets of the same message. In this respect, the two sermons are similar to what politicians often call their standard stump speech. When they're out campaigning, trying to get their message across, candidates will often speak in several different communities in a single day. It's impossible to come up with a totally different and completely novel speech at every location. Besides, there are certain things that the candidate says in that essential message that they want everyone to hear. They're not going to change just because the location shifts. But when you're dealing with different crowds and situations, that speech does vary to reflect the particular interests of that group at that time. The result is a standard speech that hits the basic points of the campaigner's essential positions, which can be tweaked a bit to address the concerns of each individual community and crowd. So each speech is much the same, but also a little different. So it was with Jesus' sermons. Luke says that a huge crowd has gathered because people are being healed by their contact with Jesus. This is evidence of his divine authority, and they want to hear his message. He starts by declaring, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. And blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh." The word blessed in this case means happy. These first statements are called the Beatitudes, from the Latin term beatus, which means blissful or fortunate. The Beatitudes are surprising because of the stark contrasts they paint. The poor are blessed. Given just how grinding poverty in that place and time was, it's hard to imagine anyone feeling blissful about it. Matthew's version takes a slightly different tack, with Jesus saying it's the poor in spirit who are blessed. If by poor in spirit he meant people who were discouraged, depressed, or in despair, the contrast is no less bizarre sounding. The key to this strange bliss is found in the assurance that to such people belongs the kingdom of heaven. Jesus is not talking about just the sweet by and by here. The kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven, is not some ethereal heavenly realm. It is life lived in the vibrant awareness of the presence and transforming grace of God. The kingdom is also experienced in this life and breaks into this world whenever and wherever that grace is accepted and practiced. The founder of Methodism, John Wesley, spent much of his early life haunted by a sense of guilt, failure, and worthlessness. Much of this sprang from his own sense of perfectionism, which he then projected onto God. He was constantly trying to buy God's love by doing good. By most people's standards, he did a lot of it. But his perfectionist streak always caused him to think he coulda, woulda, shoulda done something more, and that God was perpetually disappointed in him for his failure, real or imagined, to do so. He was in many ways among those whom Matthew's version of this sermon described as the poor in spirit, discouraged, depressed, and despairing. Finally, after years of struggle, he came to realize that God already loved him, and that he was frantically trying to earn something he couldn't, but which was readily and happily given to him already, if only he would accept it. We all have a desperate desire, a deep need to feel loved, accepted, and when necessary, forgiven. We all stand in need of hope. Once Wesley got out of God's way and let divine love displace his own perfectionism, he found a peace he had not known and a hope that energized his life. He lived in England in the time of the Industrial Revolution. Millions of people were being displaced from farms and forced to live in squalid slums, working for slave wages at jobs that were grueling and dangerous under dreadful conditions. They struggled every day just to survive, with little hope for anything better in their lives or for the lives of their children. And the rigid class system of the country, the wealthy aristocracy, enjoyed all sorts of privileges and power, while the bulk of the working people knew only poverty. They were told by the upper classes and by the Church of England that it was their lot in life and the will of God that they merited nothing better. Essentially, they were told they were worthless. And that made many of them hopeless. And that hopelessness led to violence, drunkenness, and shattered families, which only served to perpetuate their poverty. Wesley knew what it was like to feel worthless and hopeless. But once he finally grasped the meaning and the power of God's gracious love, he felt powerfully compelled to go to those people who were living in despair and tell them the good news that even they were loved and that they were not worthless in the eyes of God. This was a message which would change both the individuals who heard it and believed it and the society in which they lived. Wesley's Methodist societies fought both the poverty of the soul, which was manifested in hopelessness, loneliness, and self-destructiveness, and the poverty of the body. They banded together to help the poor. They built schools. In fact, the Sunday school movement was originally both a literacy program, teaching poor children to read, as well as a religious education program. Wesley declared there is no holiness other than social holiness. He was in the forefront of the social justice movement to end slavery. He spoke out on a variety of social and political issues and called for reforms. The kingdom of God, by his reckoning, was not just something that appeared in the individual, but was to be manifested in the world through our faithful actions to end injustice. Frankly, the rich and the powerful, who felt totally entitled to their privileged existence, and who felt no need to help lift the poor out of their misery, found Wesley's teachings quite threatening, as did the rich and powerful who felt threatened by what Jesus had to say in his time. You can hear this outrage in the words of one aristocratic Englishwoman, the Duchess of Buckingham, who wrote to the Countess Huntingdon, who had come to be a follower of Wesley. Countess Huntingdon had sent the Duchess some of Wesley's writings in the hope of winning her over. But the Duchess would have none of it, and she wrote back, "I thank your ladyship for the information concerning Methodist preachers. Their doctrines are most repulsive and strongly tinctured with impertinence and disrespect toward their superiors. In perpetually endeavoring to level all ranks and do away with all distinctions, it is monstrous to be told that you have a heart as sinful as the common wretches that crawl the earth. This is highly offensive and insulting, and I cannot but wonder that your ladyship should relish any sentiment so much at variance with high rank and good breeding." That kind of inbred institutional snobbery was par for the course in Wesley's time, and in Jesus' day as well. His first beatitude promises that whenever or wherever God's reign appears, the poor and the oppressed will find hope and relief. This does not necessarily mean that every ache or pain will be instantly relieved, but the weight of despair and degradation will be lifted. That alone can be enough to end the paralysis caused by hopelessness and open one's life up to new opportunities for wholeness and healing. The kingdom of God is wherever God's loving presence is not just acknowledged, but celebrated in a way that makes us aware of how profoundly each one of us is loved by God, and that love is selflessly shared with others. When Jesus prays to God, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," this is what he's talking about. The kingdom breaking into this world and not ghettoized in some ethereal realm beyond this life and this world. Jesus is saying that those whom the world has battered, broken, and left behind will find new life in the gospel, and that it is because it will be both transforming to the individual and will transform the world as well. We will continue our study of the Sermon on the Plain in our next episode of CyberBible 2.0. Please remember that this is an interactive Bible study, and you are welcome to post questions and comments here. I will do my best to respond to them quickly and completely. I'm Bob Morwell, pastor of Union United Methodist Church in Quincy, Illinois, inviting you to come join us in the real world, too. You're always welcome. Peace.